Morning, everyone. Bonjour à tous. Buenos dias. Just a bit of housekeeping before we start in the next minute. I'm sorry, I feel like one of the judges with the hammer. So please, I know it usually happens, someone has a phone on, just if you can leave it on mute for the next 2 hours. If you have to take your call, of course, please do. Just step outside the room. Breakfast will be there throughout. Coffee's, just get up and grab it. We do have a health break, but I mean, this is all about food, right? So it's a celebration. Let's just serve yourself. In terms of if you need Wi-Fi, it's on the wall. Bathrooms are just out straight behind. And that's in terms of housekeeping. If you've got your lanyards, you'll see there's a scan me. You'll get the agenda, all the bios of the speakers. So we're trying to go paperless. That's one of our new environmental policies at the office. And the lanyards, we will grab them back. As you leave, just deposit them back in the basket. You will find next to the basket a tote bag if you want one, or a mug, an Ika mug. There's also a very interesting plant science brochure on the next table that CropLife is one of our sponsors, so they have got a small table. It's a really interesting read, so I invite you to grab one. I don't have a copy with me, but I'm sure we can showcase that. So first off, sincere thanks to all of our partners, and especially CropLife for sponsoring the breakfast morning workshop with ICA. They're a long-term partner of ours. We've worked with CropLife International in Latin America and everywhere for years. So they're a strong partner. It's a pleasure for us to work with you once again. I see many excellencies, high commissioners, ambassadors. Welcome. Good morning. And even from Mongolia, excellent. Good morning. IFAD, Jean is there. Industry, lots of friends and partners of ICA. It's great. Keith, morning. So we have two panels you'll see on the agenda if you haven't seen it yet. The first session is on food systems. There's a lot of talk in the world about how the food system is broken. And so we did a report out of Costa Rica with some advisors to the Director General on how the unbroken food system narratives. And so we'll have a talk from a colleague of ours in Washington, D.C. We're being joined by our office in D.C., and Margaret will give some opening remarks as well. But before, I wanted to pass it on over to the museum, and Fanny can give a few opening remarks regarding the venue here and where we are in Ottawa.
Thank you, Jean-Charles. Welcome, everyone. I'm Fanny Riberon. I am the Director of Visitor Experience here at the Canada Agriculture and Food Museum. So just to introduce the museum a bit to the group. The museum is part of Ingenium, which also includes two other museums here in Ottawa. We are affiliated with the Canada Science and Technology Museum and the Canada Aviation and Space Museum. The museum is situated on the traditional and unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people, and we are glad to welcome the ICA event in this environment this morning. The museum is working with different partners and the industry to deliver hands-on programming, interactive exhibitions. We do also offer activities outside of our walls through the adventure programming. So we can also offer programming to schools, go to them, and community groups as well. We welcome approximately 200,000 people every year, and we have celebrated our 40th anniversary last year. So the museum is also located on the historic site here on the Central Experimental Farm, and we are also located on the Active Research Center, which is run by the Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. The museum also works on different projects, different exhibitions with partners. We are presently working on a sustainable agriculture gallery on site to show different innovation and sustainable ways of moving forward with agriculture. And we also do deliver food literacy programs. We have a demonstration kitchen on site where families and visitors can test some recipes and actively prepare them and of course taste them. The museum also offers summer camps all summer and for kids from 4 to 14 years old. And we also do deliver school programs year-round, on-site, virtually as well across the country. So we are really glad to welcome this event today, the ICA event, and wish you a great event this morning.
Thanks, Jenny. I know a lot of our international visitors who come. We've done many venues here, many workshops. And the last time we had Minister Bibot at this table with the president of IFAD and Lloyd Day. And IFAD was just blown away by the whole experimental farm venue. And they travel around the world, and this is pretty unique for them. And they love this model, and we're looking for ways to implement them elsewhere in the planet. So another sign of leadership from Canada. It's great. We also have some opening remarks from my colleague, Dr. Ziegler. Margaret, over to you.
Thank you so much, JC, and welcome to this amazing event. I hope you can hear me okay. I feel
Yes.
a little feedback, but I'll continue. This is a really great opportunity as stakeholders in the agri-food system to come together, share different viewpoints, share some good news, and share some challenges we face. And I hope that we have a safe space here for us to discuss a lot of the good things we're doing and also how to address the challenges that yet remain. We don't want to whitewash anything or greenwash anything. We really, as an ICA Institute, tackle problems together with our friends and partners all the way from Canada to Argentina, the Caribbean. This is the whole goal of ICA, is to be a bridge in the hemisphere and beyond. So ICA USA is proud to partner with ICA Canada and all the other parts of ICA to hold this joint event today. We're grateful for the technology that enables us to do this, to be together and to share ideas, good policy, and technical cooperation to make a difference. In ICA's mission, we focus on rural well-being, farmer livelihoods, and the improvement of sustainable systems for the health of the planet and the health of people. And this example today is a great chance for us to come together and share knowledge, cooperate together, and make a difference in the lives of consumers and farmers and the planet. So I'll pause there. I'm very happy to hear from our partners in the United States, who you will hear from later today, from both USDA and from the private sector and from state level government approaches. So thank you very much for inviting us to participate. I look forward to hearing from all of the presenters and commentators. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. So Margaret is our country representative at the ICA US office in Washington, D.C., and she's hosting a group like us this morning here in Canada in D.C., so you'll see later on there's some folks from USDA and private sector with her who will participate on the next panel. So we're going to, before I invite Canadian speakers to join me, we do have a session with Dr. Eugenio, sorry, apologies for that. Lloyd Day has a introductory video that I'd like to show now.
Good day to everyone gathered in the USA and Canada, or wherever in the world you may be this morning. I'm honored to have a few moments to introduce this session to you on broken food systems and other narratives. We at ICA have been working hard on this for some time, and that has led to our team writing the report that you will hear about next. I want to walk you through our engagement so you can know where we have been and where we are going, and by using the term we, I refer to the ICA member states and the farmers and ranchers they represent, and all of you as well. I will start with a meeting of the Inter-American Board of Agriculture resolution on science-based trade measures in 2019. We were reacting to a great deal of concern by member states about the EU policy of removing certain crop protection chemistries or reducing their MRLs to a virtually zero tolerance with no scientific basis. The EU started implementing this well before they even approved the Green Deal. A US-based firm, Bryant Christie, reported that the EU measures to restrict pesticides already approved as safe by the European Commission and other entities could impact $40 billion in the agricultural exports from the Americas alone. Our ministers did not take this threat sitting down, and they passed Resolution 520, a ministerial commitment to affirm science-based policy for risk analysis as the process for assessing, managing, and communicating risk, while at the same time protecting public health and the trade of safe food and agricultural products. This was very significant. It represented a unity among the agriculture ministers of the Americas to stand up for science-based regulatory policy to govern trade. The Americas produce about a quarter of the world's food and export 1/3 of all food produced globally. So the opinion from this hemisphere matters. Meanwhile, also in 2019, the UN One Planet Network convened a meeting at ICA to discuss what is now commonly referred to as the transformation of food systems. They argue, as is noted in the paper to be presented, that the food system is broken for a variety of reasons, including health conditions, poor nutrition, carbon emissions, and persistent global hunger. Well, we found it somewhat curious that a meeting to discuss transforming food systems did not have any farmers or ranchers present, nor any farm associations or ministers of agriculture, nor anybody from the major food distribution and food production companies. How can you talk about transforming food systems without any of the participants in the actual system? And then again, when you think about it, how can you call a system that is providing food and nutrition to 8 billion people across the globe a failure? While you certainly can point out deficiencies, you have to put them in the appropriate context. 100 years ago, we were struggling as a planet to feed barely 2 billion people, and most farming was subsistence agriculture, even in North America. But technology, innovation, and good old farmer know-how changed all that to feed and clothe today what is 4 times the population of 100 years ago. Oh, and produce a lot of energy too. Suffice it to say, the agriculture sector has met every challenge we have faced in the last 100 years, and I'm optimistic that we will continue to do so. We have witnessed the transformation from horses to tractors to fertilizers to chemistries to biotechnology and now to big data, digital, satellite, and precision agriculture, and the miracle of gene editing and artificial intelligence. The food system today is an absolute miracle. So, in reaction to this broken food system narrative, and during a global pandemic, ICA started convening discussions with ministers and the private sector via Zoom, both to ensure the food system was intact, but also to begin discussing a new narrative regarding food system transformation. And then along came the UN Food System Summit, which doubled down on the notion of food system transformation as a severely broken food system. With the input we had been receiving from ministers of agriculture in the private sector, ICA began assembling key messages to submit to the UN Food System Summit in 2021. We were the only region of the world to submit our recommendations to the UN pre-summit in Rome in July, and let me tell you, they were not so well received. You see, the cake had already been baked, but without the input of the hardworking people that farmed the cake's ingredients, or baked it, or sold it, or the ministers that represented them. The ministers of agriculture of the Americas submitted 16 clear messages to the summit that were based on 3 fundamental principles. First, that farmers need to be a part of the discussions and need to be respected and supported. Second, that science, not political science or ideology, must be the foundation for public policy. And third, that agriculture must be viewed as part of the solution to the challenges of climate change. No other sector has the ability to both sequester carbon and reduce its emissions like agriculture. Moreover, agriculture is pivotal for transitioning from fossil fuel-based economies to one that is renewable, regenerative, a bioeconomy. We will meet the challenge to produce enough food, feed, fiber, and energy for the world while reducing the impact on the environment. This will all be done by the convergence of myriad technologies and innovations if we are able to both approve and enable them while protecting human health and the environment. We can do this, but we need to get better at it. Following the Food System Summit, we have taken this message onward to the UN climate change meetings in Egypt, the UAE, and this fall in Azerbaijan. Also, we are continuing our policy work on science, ensuring that the Americas is well represented at global standard-setting bodies. There is no one-size-fits-all when it comes to regulating a world with diverse regions, topographies, climates, growing conditions, and cultures. We need regulations that understand this and not try to ram a square peg into a round hole because one region or country may think in a certain way. This dialogue and many others are part of this process. We need your help to share this message with your friends, communities, and political leadership. We need to work together to change public perception and to base it on what is a fact. The food system is a miracle, and we will make it even better. We have done it before, and we will do it again. But we all must work together. Thank you very much for your attention, and best wishes for your discussions today.
You're here. Yeah, thanks, Lloyd. Was working with him on the talk from Geneva. He's at the WTO Policy Forum discussions, wanted to be here live, but sends his regrets. And I think his core messaging provides a strong context for what we're going to be discussing over the next hour. So we have two parts. So we'll have a presentation of that report that Lloyd's referring to by Dr. Eugenio Diaz-Boni in DC, and then we will have a joint panel with the US. So then I will invite Tom, Keith, and Aaron to come to the table in about 15-20 minutes. So Eugenio, are you online?
Hi.
Can you
Yes, I'm here and I'm uploading the presentation. Do you see it?
We can see you, not the presentation.
Very good. Thank you very much to all the participants in Canada, the US, and my colleagues from ICA. This is a report that we prepared with Eduardo Trigo, Rosario Campos, with the help of Margaret and Jean-Charles and other colleagues. Basically, as Lloyd mentioned, the idea is to look at this narrative of broken systems. And for first, why food systems? And you know, food systems is the nutrition and health aspect of food systems are crucial. The world is having this triple burden of malnutrition, hunger, obesity, and lack of minerals and vitamins and other crucial nutrients. Almost half of the population live in households that work in food systems. So the employment impact of food system is enormous at the global level. Close to 1/3 of the greenhouse gas emissions come from food systems. It's important for biodiversity. And of course, it's very important for peace and social stability, the proper operation of food systems. That's why both the Agenda 2030 and the climate change negotiations had tracks related to agriculture and food systems. And because of the urgency in terms of getting this agenda moving forward, this narrative of broken food systems that subtract value, meaning food systems have negative externalities that are sort of hidden costs. And once you count the value of that is more than the value of the market value of food, and therefore subtract value from societies. As Lloyd mentioned, we thought that it was not very balanced analysis if you want to solve the problems, A, and B, is not very good to mobilize all the people that need to participate in transformation. So we started to look at the data. Lloyd already mentioned something. From the 60s to the 2023, the world moved from 3 billion to 8 billion, Latin America from 20, triple the population, and still we are producing more than 30% calories and more than even of proteins per capita. That means that in the Americas, there is only one country, Haiti, that now has an average of calories, availability of calories per person per day that is below the minimum required. That's just one person. And at the global level, it's about less than around 10-12% of the countries. So meaning that if you think in terms of the 60s, when people like Paul Ehrlich and others were saying that it was unavoidable that we were going to have famines in the next decade, that didn't happen. And if you also think in terms of Malthus' view, population and the growth of population and the production of food, the only way to match demand and supply was through wars. So if we had this extremely positive performance on the supply side of the food systems, then the world would have been a more peaceful and stable in social terms than would have been otherwise. We have other good indicators related to what I mentioned, but not only to that. For instance, there are strong declines in hunger and poverty over the last several decades, stunting and wasting, which are of course related to food availability, are also declining. In the case of Latin America and the Caribbean, is way below the stunting is half the average, the world average. Of course, in Canada and US is very, very low. And this happened also with not great increases in land. At the global level, only 9% increase in agricultural land. In Latin America was a little bit more, 16%. But in Canada and the US, it's a decline. If you look at the hectares in production in the 60s, compared to now, it's about 40 million hectares less, or about 7-8%. And also emissions, this is data from FAO. If you look at the emissions from food systems, that in absolute value, they declined from 90 to 2021, about less than 4%, while at the global level it increased. That meant, or this means that the percentage of emissions from food systems in the Americas compared to total emissions at the global level dropped from less than 13 to about 8% now. And all this with real prices, real meaning adjusted by inflation, that are lower than it was in the 60s and 70s. In the process, and the paper focuses more on Latin America and the Caribbean, with Margaret and others help us to also expand to US and Canada some of the data. Latin America and the Caribbean moved from 10% to 13% of global production, the value of total production of food, and the Americas represent about 23%, as Lloyd mentioned. But more importantly, it's the largest net agricultural and food exported globally. So basically, it's the Americas plus some other countries that produce the additional amount that is needed for the rest of the world, and helping stabilize prices and quantities, and therefore helping with food security at the global level. And at the same time, not only food security, but also sustainability for the planet as a whole, because the forest in the north and in the Amazon and so on, they play a central role in carbon sinks as planetary water and oxygen cycle, preservation of biodiversity, and so on. And this is, as also Lloyd mentioned, is the only sector, agriculture is the only sector that can help with mitigation, adaptation, and resilience through the technologies like no-till agriculture, sustainable livestock, agroforestry, and so on. Having said that, we do still have problems, of course. No, we still have 8 million people suffering from hunger, more than 3 billion that cannot afford healthy diets. Obesity is even worse problem now, and with health implications. 1/3 of the greenhouse gas emissions. And I mentioned that it's the biggest employer. The food systems are the biggest employer at the global level, but at the same time, most of the poor people at the global level, poor farmers in developing countries, informal workers in value chains, and so on, those poor people are also in the food system. So we do have things that we need to improve on. However, the view, as also Lloyd mentioned, the ICA's vision is that the food systems are not broken, they neither subtract value, but they need improvement, certainly in their economic, social, environmental, and health dimensions. To do that, what we tried in the document is to have a more balanced and disaggregated analysis, because some of the discussion about the costs of food or the hidden cost of food, they try to come up with a number. But in fact, the interesting thing is to look at each one of the problems. What is the problem? What is the magnitude of the problem? What is the reason of each one of these problems individually, the contextual and structural reasons that may be leading to the problem. And also to look at cost and benefits. And instead of looking at the true cost of food, we think about the true value of food. Why? Well, because we need to correct the negative, but we need to maintain what is the beneficial aspects. We need to consider trade-offs. And as Lloyd also suggested, we need to mobilize, engage all the actors in the food system, the food systems in general. No, we cannot do the transformation or get to the good benefits and eliminate the cost without the persons that are really in food systems to get to healthy diet, income and employment generation, and environmental sustainability. And that's why we look at the different type of problems, and we try, this is a little bit more technical, separate, depending on the nature of the problem. Is a pure externality, is another market failure, is a general equilibrium effect, is an inefficiency, is an equity problem. Each one needs, depending on the type of problem, you need also a type of intervention. But also, that's something that can be solved within the food system or comes from outside the food system, because if it comes from outside the food system, whatever you do in the food system will not solve it. So we try to do this more disaggregated granular analysis to help with the process of having a proper diagnostic, and in the case of the Americas, maintain all the benefits coming from this strong food system that operates in the Americas, which in any case, it requires a strong focus on science, technology, innovation, infrastructure as well. And of course, Lloyd also mentioned, it's crucial the participation of agricultural producers. Otherwise, the positive transformation will not happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Eugenio. And we'll keep the Q&A till later. We do have Senator Black online, and we'll invite him to speak to the recent soil report, and then we'll invite the next panel to come up with me here.
Good morning, and thank you very much for the opportunity to contribute to this important discussion on the state of our food systems and the role of soil health plays in ensuring a secure and sustainable future. Sorry, just a sec. I apologize that I'm unable to participate in person at Canada's Agriculture and Food Museum. I'm headed to the Outdoor Farm Show, Canada's Outdoor Farm Show in Woodstock, Ontario, immediately after I speak today. Certainly, I had a chance very quickly to review the report that you're speaking of, and I want to begin by congratulating the team at ICA on the publishing of its recent report, as well as congratulate all those who collaborated in completing it. As we look forward to the future of agriculture, we must move beyond the oversimplified idea of broken food systems and instead recognize the value and potential of agri-food systems, as is highlighted in your recent report. This report reminds us that while challenges such as climate change, sustainability, and food security persist, agri-food systems have and continue to play a crucial role in feeding a growing global population and supporting economic development. The Americas, in particular, as we've heard, have demonstrated remarkable progress, contributing significantly to global food security. Yet the report calls for more innovation in how we can manage our resources like soil, water, and biodiversity, exactly the themes you are addressing today. With proper planning and innovation, we can strengthen the true value of our food systems, ensuring they continue to meet the needs of our growing population while protecting our environment, a key priority. As we know already and have seen, our food systems face a myriad of challenges today, from hunger and obesity to greenhouse gas emissions and disparity in access to healthy diets. In this context, soil health stands as a critical foundation, or as myself and members of the Standing Senate Committee on Agriculture and Forestry might say, we're standing on critical ground. Over the past 2 years, our committee has dedicated itself to the study of soil health in Canada, culminating in the release of our report, Critical Ground: Why Soil is Essential to Canada's Economic, Environmental, Human, and Social Health. This report highlights the interconnected issues at the heart of our food systems and offers a potential pathway forward for Canada and countries around the world. Healthy soils are not just important, they're essential for supporting resilient agricultural systems capable of feeding a growing population while maintaining the delicate balance between environmental and economic demands. Soil health impacts everything: food quality, crop yields, carbon sequestration, and biodiversity. When soil is degraded, the ability to produce affordable, nutritious food is compromised, contributing to food insecurity and exacerbating the inequalities already present in our food system. The narrative of broken food systems often stems from these imbalances. It's not just the soil that's affected, it's everything connected to it. Loss of prime agricultural land to urban sprawl, infrastructure development, resource extraction, and the impacts of climate change further compound these disparities. When we lose valuable farmland, we lose part of our ability to sustainably feed our population and protect our environment. Our Senate study has shed light on several ways the federal government here in Canada, in collaboration with the agriculture and forestry sectors, can restore soil vitality. Key actions include promoting improved land management practices, the creation of a national soils advocate, enhancing education for farmers, providing credits for early adopters, and developing policies that prioritize long-term sustainability over short-term economic gains. And while maximum residue limits are critical for ensuring food safety, ensuring soil health requires a focus on prevention. We need to address the root cause of degradation by reducing harmful practices and encouraging regenerative farm approaches and practices that can restore and sustain the land with which we stand on. As we face these complex challenges, it's essential that we view soil health not as a peripheral issue, but as a core component of rebuilding our food systems, ensuring food security, and addressing the pressing environmental concerns of our time. Using a QR code, which I think may be on the screen in the room that you're at, certainly I would encourage you to download the Soil Health Report, which is available in both French and English. And so if it's there, you can download the report. Thanks very much again for inviting me to participate. And I do regret I do have to leave very shortly to head off to another presentation that I have to make. Thanks again.
Sincere thanks, Senator Black. We wish you much success with your event as well. So we're going to have a bit of a switch now. Of most of the online portions on our guests is done. We're going to have a joint panel with the Americans now. I'm going to ask Fanny to give us a spare chair here. I have 3 guests in the room that'll join me here. Tom Rosser, Keith Curry, and Aaron, please come on up. And then in the US, I understand that one of the speakers has to leave sooner than expected. He has a hard stop. And so I'm going to invite Tom Rosser and Elise first, then Eric Mittendal from Protein Pack. Sure, come on over. So to start off in terms of reactions, commentary, a Canadian perspective, I'd like to invite ADM Tom Rosser from AgCan to go first.
Thanks, Jean-Charles, and good morning, everyone. You can hear me okay? Mic seems to be working. I'd just like to begin by, first of all, thanking IECA for their leadership in putting together this report, in challenging what too often is an orthodoxy in international circles about our food system being broken. I do also want to thank again, Jean-Charles and the IECA Canada team for organizing this event, and also to CropLife for sponsoring it, to have what I think is a really valuable discussion. And we've already, several of the prior speakers have already touched on a couple of themes that I wanted to highlight. One of them is that, you can always find points to substantiate whether the glass is half full or half empty, but I would concur with the idea of challenging the food system being broken, that if you talk about food systems transformation, the brokenness of our food system, first of all, it takes away from the tremendous progress that has been made over time in making our food system more productive and more sustainable. And second of all, it's just defeatist when, in partnership with people throughout the value chain, we should be excited about, first of all, celebrating the progress that has been made to date, and second of all, getting excited about the opportunities that lie ahead of us. We'd heard earlier, saw some of the data from the agricultural system in Latin America and the Caribbean. Numbers in Canada are broadly similar. In the past 25 years, we've roughly doubled our agricultural production in this country, while essentially keeping greenhouse gas emissions steady in constant terms. So we've seen a very substantial decrease in emissions intensity. Well, that's a significant accomplishment. I think there's almost universal recognition that there's opportunities to go further. And we see that, groups from the grain growers to the dairy farmers to the chicken farmers to some of the big Canadian-based agri-food companies like McCain's and Maple Leaf, they've all undertaken net zero commitments or otherwise committed to very ambitious sustainability goals for the future. And so I think from a government point of view, there's a big opportunity to make the system more sustainable, not by cajoling people, but by partnering with them. And toward that end, we've rolled out about $1.5 billion in environmental programming in the past several years. One area where we see an opportunity for the food system to do substantially better is food loss and waste, where, both in Canada and globally, the data in this space is notoriously lousy, but somewhere between a third and a half of all food gets wasted throughout the value chain. And so to try and spur innovation in that space, we a couple of years ago announced a food waste reduction challenge, which was quite a bit different than the way our programs usually work, where we just invited people to bring forward ideas about what they could do across the value chain to reduce food loss and waste, and then awarded a prize to the strongest finalists. In fact, Jean-Charles was one of the independent judges in that process. We saw hundreds of innovations in response to that, and we're really proud of the program and its results. And often when we're engaging with counterparts internationally, it's something that we like to showcase and highlight. Just maybe one or two other points before I shut up, Jean-Charles, if I haven't already blown through my time allocation. One of them being, and I was pleased to see the report highlights this, the importance of international trade to food security and sustainability. That in order, in terms of making a system more resilient, more efficient, that a rules-based international trading system can be integral to that at a global level. And it's important as we talk about sustainability and food systems that we not lose sight of that. Finally, whether we look over 25 years or 100, all of the progress that we've seen in the efficiency, the sustainability of our food system has been the result of innovation. And so it's important to realize that continued investment in science and innovation, and partnerships internationally, are critical to making further progress. We at the department are really pleased of our partnership through IECA in the Proce Norte process with scientific researchers in our counterparts in the United States and Mexico, and are committed to continuing our long history and tradition of investment in science and innovation. And I say that mindful of the fact that we're gathered at on the site of the Central Experimental Farm, where we've been engaged in agricultural innovation for at least a century, and probably longer than that. And this is just one of 22 centers that we as a government have across the country. And so maybe with that, Jean-Charles, thank you for your time and attention, and turn the floor back to you.
Thanks so much. Great Canadian perspective. ICA Canada plays the secretariat role for Proce Norte, hence the reference to the science bit. We'd like to now have the American perspective. We've got Elise Golan online. She's the Director of Sustainable Development at the USDA.
Great, thank you. Thanks for inviting me to join you. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes.
It's always a pleasure to join ACAP. We've got interesting things going on all the time. And this report is a wonderful example of the work that ICA is doing to help shed a light, this time on the many flaws in the narrative of the broken food system. Clearly, this narrative and the associated calls to dismantle current agri-food systems glosses over the many accomplishments of food systems, And we all agree that there's no denying that food systems are facing a multitude of challenges, including as related to nutrition, environmental sustainability, climate change. But how could anyone argue for completely dismantling systems that have managed to lift 216 million people out of undernourishment since 1990 and have reduced childhood stunting by 109 million children between 1990 and 2019? How could anyone argue for dismantling systems that is estimated by USDA's Economic Research Service are projected to reduce the number of food insecure people by 66% by between 2023 and 2033 in the countries for which this analysis is done. So instead, as pointed out by the authors of the ICA report, instead of focusing on a broken food system, we should promote a narrative that calls for strengthening what works and identifying and assessing weaknesses in current food systems to make changes where they are needed. I'd like to take my very few minutes here to focus on a strength of our powerhouse agricultural systems that could be leveraged to help improve the sustainability of food systems around the world, and that is agricultural productivity growth. Agricultural productivity growth is the engine that has helped feed the world, alleviate poverty, and reduce agricultural land expansion and associated greenhouse gas emissions. Consider some of the trends in productivity growth and resource use between 1990 and 2020, and a lot of speakers have already touched on this. From the beginning of this time period, the average world agricultural productivity growth rate, as measured by total factor productivity, rose from less than 0.1% per year to nearly 2% per year by the early 2000s. And then it slowed slightly to an average, actually quite a bit, to an average of 1.1% per year by 2020. Now, this recent slowdown occurred in both the global north and the global south, with the slowdown in the global south especially pronounced, falling from an average annual rate of 2.2% in the early 2000s to 1.1% in 2020. Moreover, this slowdown in the global south affected virtually all regions. The productivity growth over this time period has helped to feed people and reduce poverty. Research shows that it has also reduced the intensity of natural resource use in agriculture. And in fact, the global average amount of land used and greenhouse gas emitted per unit of agricultural output fell by half or more from 1990 to 2020. So what happens if agricultural productivity growth continues to fall, or if the benefits are not extended to more areas of the world? What happens if we don't seek to strengthen what works? We will likely face higher food prices, an increase in food insecurity and hunger, an increase in poverty, an increase in natural resource use, and an increase in greenhouse gas emissions. Now, on this last point, research is already showing that, as predicted, slowing productivity growth, along with increasing agricultural land use and input intensification, means a larger environmental footprint of agriculture, including higher greenhouse gas emissions. Countries where productivity growth improvements has enabled fewer inputs to be used in farm production have been able to curb their growth or even reduce their greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture. Countries where inputs use is still rising are seeing a rapid growth in greenhouse gas emissions. As pointed out in the ICA report, land expansion for agricultural production is one of the largest drivers of greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture, primarily due to conversion of forests to cropland and livestock production. As also pointed out in the report, LAC countries, which have contributed to a third of the global increase in agricultural land since the 1960s, also accounted for about 80% of global deforestation from 1990 to 2015. 80%. Addressing this deforestation will require a multifaceted approach, but accelerating agricultural productivity growth, strengthening what works with innovative new technologies and management approaches to improve the resource efficiency of agricultural production and reduce forest conversion is an essential part of that approach. It is also a narrative that I hope we can all agree on. Thank you. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Lise. Good to see you again. And you'll see on the agenda, we're a couple of minutes late, so we'll just eat up some of the time in the dialogue at the Q&A session. The Americans have asked me to move Eric Mithendahl from Protein Pack ahead of schedule. He has to leave. So I'm going to invite him next before Keith. And over to you, Eric.
Good morning, and thank you very much for the invitation to come speak. Thank you to ICA for being really strong partners of ours at the Meat Institute and Protein Pact and sharing the positive work that's occurring in animal agriculture across the Americas, and particularly related to this report. Thank you to the authors for putting out a report that addresses the common narrative related to broken food systems and the true cost of food. The true cost of food narrative, having sat through multiple COPs and food system summits events over the last several years, has really taken hold amongst many people as fact that the food system is broken and the costs of food are greater than what is brought forward in terms of benefits on the table. What is often lost in those narratives and not mentioned is the small print that's included in those reports, and really glad to see that called out in this report, that the benefits are not included in those estimates. And the benefits of our food system are critical. And so this report is a really strong step towards recognizing the benefits in our food system and the various things that are brought forward to support healthy people and a healthy planet. At the Meat Institute, we represent meat companies in North America, representing 95% of the red meat that's produced and the majority of the poultry as well. And often in these true cost conversations, animal agriculture is typically called out specifically as part of the problem. And there's even a true cost of animal protein coalition to highlight animal agriculture and what they say are the negative externalities of animal agriculture. I've always found those conversations to be very exclusionary, trying to exclude various production methods of all types, but particularly within animal agriculture around the world, as well, while we need to be taking a very inclusive approach and thinking about how animal agriculture and all different forms of agriculture can be solutions for feeding a planet sustainably and healthy in a healthy way. At the Meat Institute, we have done this through our commitment to the Protein Pact for the People, Animals, and Climate of Tomorrow. It is an effort that both works with the industry in North America to find a consistent approach for best practices, not just on environmental impact and improving our impact there, but also on animal welfare, food safety, nutrition and food security, and worker safety and human rights. And we have, for the last several years, been collecting data from our members in the industry to demonstrate the progress that we're making, figure out where we need to continue to make improvements, and put resources towards those improvements. A couple of ways that we've done that are to sign up for a program called Supplier Locked, which helps to educate companies on how to measure and reduce their greenhouse gas emissions and set science-based targets. We've created a greenhouse gas measurement tool that companies can use, specific for meat companies, to help them measure and reduce their emissions as well. And we're actively working on food security efforts to help fill the protein gap for hungry people across the US. And so we are committed to working on this for the rest of this decade, and doing so in partnership both with international organizations like ICA, with the Sustainable Productivity Growth Coalition at USDA, and partners in our supply chain, going down to the farm, from feed production to the farmers and ranchers that raise the animals, to our facilities and onto retail and restaurants. No one sector is going to be able to make these improvements and achieve the goals that we have alone. And so we want to be sure that we're working across all of animal agriculture and agriculture as a whole to be solutions oriented and figure out how we can be providing for healthy people, healthy animals, healthy communities, and a healthy planet. And so, again, really appreciate the opportunity to come share the work that we're doing. For more information on what our goals are and the progress that we're making, please visit theproteinpact.org. That's PACT. And we look forward to continuing to partner with ICA and others to help be solutions for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Thanks for that great partnership with Protein Pack. Enjoying the relationship. I'd like to come back to Canada for our next two speakers and invite Keith and then Aaron to speak.
Thanks very much, John Charles. You know, I really appreciate, as the president of the Canadian Federation of Agriculture, the relationship that continues to grow with IECA, and I really want to thank you, and I know we've worked a lot with Lloyd Day of late as well on collaborating on a lot of events, and we really appreciate that collaboration. For those of you that don't know the Canadian Federation of Agriculture, we are a general farm organization that represents about 190,000 farmers and ranchers right across Canada from coast to coast to coast. And we are the farmers in this country. We represent the farm community, but we also understand that the food system is very important beyond the farm gate as well. Without that system being healthy, it makes it very difficult for us as primary producers behind the farm gate to be healthy as well. So the collaboration with the agri-food industry is very, very important to our organization. While our focus may be just on representing farmers, we also need to make sure that we're echoing the voices of our partners beyond the farm gate to make sure that we can continue to advance what we need to do to feed the world. And Canada certainly is doing a great job of feeding the world. I think, you know, you've heard a lot of similar comments today. Lloyd Day did a great summary of just about everything in his opening remarks. We could almost quit after that. But I have to agree with him and Aika in that the food system is not broken. I'm not sure where that all started, how that all started, why that all started, the notion of a broken food system. But the reality is it's not broken. And you've heard already from our speakers today many reasons why it's not. You know, in Canada, we produce about $150 billion gross domestic product, or we did last year anyways, and it's roughly about 7% of the country's GDP. And it benefits all Canadians, not just those that are in the cities or urban areas, but also those that live in rural Canada as well. And I know my generation has nearly doubled the production that my father's generation did. And that just doesn't happen by luck, by happenstance, or just being in the right place at the right time. It comes from a lot of new innovations, new technologies, whether that's new soil science that we have, whether it's seed genetics, whether it's new technologies in crop protection products, whether it's livestock genetics, whether it's feed additives, the list goes on. And farmers are first and foremost to adapt these new technologies. Sometimes a little bit selfish because it's economic, but also because we know that we have to maintain our farm operations in a sustainable manner for the future, not just for today and not just for the economics today. We need to make sure that we continue to operate our businesses in a sustainable fashion that will go on for generations and generations. I think, you know, we also have to deal with issues that, like many countries do, things like labor disruptions, which, you know, certainly supply chain and labor are two of the big things that are affecting all industries right now, but certainly agriculture is no exception to that. I think in the last 6 years, we've gone through 8 different rail disruptions or stoppages or protests. And for those of you not familiar with the rail system in Canada, we really have a duopoly of two main companies controlling all the rail lines and moving all their goods and services, and there's a tremendous amount of goods that are moved on railway. So when those stoppages occur, it really affects the economy, it affects businesses all around the country, and in particular farmers who rely on the rail lines for moving goods out, but also for moving goods and services in as well. And then we have, of course, a little thing called the COVID-19 pandemic, which certainly really changed people's perspective, at least at that time. But I'm really proud of the way agriculture stood up and continued to deliver food to the world during a worldwide pandemic. And I think that's something that we really need to be proud of, and really expedites the aspect of resilience within the agriculture food system and from farmers in general. And we don't just feed Canada, we feed the world. Canada is an exporting nation, and it's something that we're very proud of in supplying really safe, high-quality food to countries right around the world. And we have exports of nearly 100 billion annually going out to countries all over the world. And right now we are I believe, the 8th largest exporter in the world. Not just land products, we also are big in the seafood industry as well. And I think there's some 200 countries that we are exporting goods to every year. Along with that, we provide safe food. Our standard of production is so high, and our expectation then from a regulatory framework means that our products are very safe, are very high quality, and that's something I think that we're very proud of. Sometimes it can be troublesome for some farmers having high standards to meet. But at the end of the day, when we are shipping those products around the world, nobody thinks twice about buying Canadian because it's good to buy. It's good food, it's good quality product that they're getting. But all this has to still be done with sustainable agriculture practices as we move forward. Our world is in a climate thinking mode. That I don't mean that as a critical statement. It's just the reality of the world that we're living in today. So producing sustainably isn't something that's new to farmers. What's new is how we do it today versus how we did it yesterday, and that's something that farmers adapt to every single day. We have to. Our biggest friend and our biggest foe is Mother Nature, and we have no control over what she does. So being adaptive and being agile and able to move in any direction that we need to is something that we do on a continuous basis on the farm, as do a lot of other industries beyond the farm gate as well. But certainly it's something we have to do every day. So being adjustable to how we are sustainable is not something new for Canadian agriculture. You know, whether you're talking about water conservation, whether you're talking about soil management, you heard Senator Black earlier talking about his soil study. The reality is we can talk about emissions all we want. We can talk about all the things in the air. It all starts under our feet. If we don't get what's right under our feet first, the rest of it doesn't matter. We can't produce sustainably. We can't produce the food and the food quality and the nutritious food that we need without getting that soil component correct and doing it as right as possible, as often as possible. So maintaining that healthy soil and that healthy biodiversity is critically important to farmers and ranchers. Let's not forget the ranchers who have one of the biggest carbon sinks in Canada right now. Our beef farmers are very proud of the fact that their pasture systems are one of the best soil sequesters of carbon that there is out there. Unfortunately, they're not getting recognized for it. Agriculture seems to have been demonized in the last number of years around the climate conversations. And in particular, we all know how much beef production has been demonized very unfairly, because if you look at the life cycle of an animal, it's actually good for our soil, it's good for our air, it's good for emissions, and it's good for our plates because we get good high quality beef products coming out of beef production in Canada and around the world. So let's start celebrating and recognizing that, and then figuring how we even help them to be better and all farmers to be better going forward. I think we heard, I forget whether it was, I think it was Lloyd at the end of his talk mentioned about how we start to manage these things going forward. And certainly one of the big things that we've been pushing is around the subject matter of data. I think having that accurate, adequate data available to allow us to advance some of these techniques and technologies and practices that we do is vitally important going forward. And the more data that we have, the more armed we are, the better we can be on the ground. And I think certainly that'll help not only in maintaining sustainable businesses and sustainable practices, but it'll also help in the environment overall and grow our biodiversity right across the country and right across our farming businesses. We at CFA have been part of a larger team that's been pushing pretty hard for the last 3 years to develop a sustainable ag strategy. All the players in the agri-food industry have been involved, including government. I know Tom and his team have been part of that discussion all along, and we are literally, I don't know if Tom wants to maybe have an announcement today, but I think we're on the cusp of having that sustainable ag strategy actually kicked off and put into place. And I think that's going to be a real key piece for agriculture to collectively grab everybody and bring them together. One of the things that drives me nuts all the time is regulatory framework is a necessary evil that we have to have. We need rules to follow. But all too often governments make rules without thinking about the practical implementation on the ground of those rules. It's not that we're against rules, we're just against dumb rules, and rules that do not enhance the businesses and enhance the opportunities to not only produce more, but also to feed more people around the world. So the more that we can have practical implementation rules in place, the better we'll all be, which is where we hope the sustainable ag strategy will come into play, and making sure that we have the right framework of regulatory rules out there to make sure that we can do things the best that we can do while maintaining the structure that the governments of the day want to have in place. And part of that also is, I mentioned earlier, supply chain disruptions, which are a big part of everybody's life these days, it seems like, but certainly in food production, it's no different. Labor is a huge part of that supply chain disruption that's out there, getting enough labor on farm to produce the food and get it off. Our trucking industry, which I know is a big part of the target for emission reductions in the food system, we still are way underserviced with labor and truckers to move our products where they need to go and how they need to get there, whether it's to ports, whether it's to grocery stores, whether it's to processors. So labor is certainly a big piece of that. We've been calling at CFA, we've been calling for the government to develop with us a critical farm and food input strategy. And I think, you know, if we can get that strategy in place and up and running, it will certainly be a big part of how we look at, going forward, how we look at solving some of these supply chain issues, our inputs that are so vital to us. I think it's a key thing, in particular in the transportation side, and how we can minimize our impact on the environment, our impact on emissions, our impact on sustainability, but also how we grow the industry profitably and respectfully as we go forward without sacrificing businesses to do so. And really, the other key component to our industry and to our sustainability is how we deal with our international partners, our trading partners. Certainly, of late, we just had an incident the last couple of weeks with Canada and China on some tariffs that have been imposed on products that have been traded between the two countries. And usually when Canada imposes tariffs on another country, the first industry that suffers is agriculture, and we're just bearing ourselves, and I'm sure Aaron will probably talk about this a little bit. We're getting ready for potential tariffs coming on some of our agriculture products, which will devastate the industry. And so having those kind of relationships with our trading partners, you know, and maintaining the rules-based trading system that is vitally important to all countries, avoiding those silly non-tariff trade barriers that quite often get put up so that countries can protect domestic supply is something that, you know, we really need governments around the world to work very, very hard on to make sure that they maintain those proper rules-based systems and keep goods and services flowing between countries. I know that we're a little short on time, so I won't take too long. The other aspect I would talk about, Jean-Charles, is one of the things that we need here in Canada, we desperately need here in Canada to be better, is our connectivity. It's a real key piece to helping our farmers be in 2024 and 2025 and beyond in their farming practices. We're in a digital world. We're in an electronic world, and certainly connectivity is a big stumbling block to many of our producers in order to advance the sustainable types of farming practices that we need going forward. So that also is a key piece as well. So I'll close with that, and I'll leave it at that. I got lots more to talk about, but I know there's smarter people down this side of the table than me, so I'll give them the opportunity to speak as well. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Keith. On the contrary, that was very enriching. And on the connectivity side, it's a continental issue. It's not just a Canadian issue. This affects every member state in the Americas. We did work with Microsoft, a study to look at connectivity in the Americas. 72 million rural dwellers in the Americas have zero connection, no connection to the internet. Connectivity is about 36 to 43%. So farmers in those spaces in our member states can't use all those great digitalization tools, and they're not accessible. So we could do a whole panel just on that. Sorry, Aaron, over to you.
To make it work? Okay, I'm on. Thank you very much. Good morning. It's my pleasure to be here on behalf of the Canada Grains Council. This is a national association, advocacy and policy association that represents the interests of the entire grain value chain. We have at the table producer commissions and associations from across the country, exporters, processors, life science companies, and the national commodity associations. It is a model, I have since learned, that is unique to Canada and one that we are particularly proud of, built on a foundation and a commitment to collaboration and consensus building. I was reflecting on some of the challenges that were outlined in the report that ICA published on this topic that we're talking about here today. And it's very clear that while we have seen significant improvements with respect to both the production and the distribution of food, we still have some work to do. I don't disagree with Lloyd's assessment that the current system is by many means a miracle. But as cited in the report, the system has kept pace with a very rapid and recent growth in population, which has over doubled between 1960 and 2022. And international trade has allowed us to efficiently move food from areas of surplus to areas of need. And this has become increasingly important when you consider the impact that recent conflicts have had, as well as widespread drought that have occurred as a result of climate change. The system is resilient, the system is innovative, it is adaptive. It has served us very well, but it is not perfect. And while I'm not an expert on the topic of food security, so I can't suggest that I have some recommendations to make with respect to how to improve the system, here's what I've been thinking about in preparation for today's conversation. And this is a common theme that seems to be emerging from a few of the remarks that folks have made, yourself included, Tom, and that is that one of the key contributors to the system's success has been innovation. Whether it's equipment that's used on the farm, modern agriculture practices, improved genetics, or advancements in crop protection products, the sector has adapted to find more efficient and effective ways to increase production and increase nutrient content. And as the report revealed, and I was quite surprised to see and thrilled to see some of the improvements that have been made, not only in Canada, but across the Americas with respect to how we're becoming increasingly sustainable. And in fact, there was one specific statistic in the report, I can't recall if it was 1.2% or 1.3% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions in the United States in 2022. And that was the greatest reduction in GHG emissions over any other sector in the United States. So this is clearly an industry that across the Americas is making some significant improvements with respect to its sustainability track record. But something concerns me with respect to the direction in which this global conversation is going. And that is that while I agree that despite the fact that the food system is imperfect, the notion that the system is broken and in need of transformation is a dangerous narrative. I have sat in many rooms, and some of you have been with me for those conversations, where very well-educated and informed individuals and influential individuals whose ideas on how the global system needs to change would without a doubt have very deeply negative consequences on the overall system and on many of the challenges that we're trying to overcome, both with respect to the environment and with respect to increasing global food insecurity. People who some folks have already mentioned are so completely divorced from the realities of production agriculture, and they don't recognize the important role that many of my members play and the significant investments that many of these companies are making with respect to research and development to find solutions to many of the challenges that are outlined in ICA's report. And that is why I'm very pleased to be here and grateful to ICA and to JC for the invitation to contribute to this important discussion, because we are the architects of the food system of the future. Farmers, innovators, and policymakers. And that's why we will continue to advocate for an environment that first acknowledges, a regulatory environment that first acknowledges the importance of innovation and evidence-based policy, that prioritizes science over ideology, and that sees agriculture as part of the solution. And I think many of these pillars were touched on by Lloyd Day in some of his initial remarks as well. We are a part of a solution, not just a problem that needs to be fixed. And finally, one that recognizes that in order for farmers to be sustainable, they have to be profitable. This means that they have to have access to the tools that are going to help them continue to mitigate the impacts of climate change. So the focus of these conversations globally going forward needs to be on sustainable intensification, or as Lee said, on sustainable productivity growth. Agri-environmental policies must consider the potential impacts on both productivity, food security, and trade flows. That is the only way that we are going to collectively be able to address issues related to climate change. and the very serious widespread issues related to growing food insecurity. And so when I think about the role for all of us in the room today in my final closing remarks, JC, I think about a role for Canada and the leadership. And I would go beyond Canada, I think, with respect to some of the comments that were made across the Americas and the collective track record that we're making, certainly by comparison to many of our global counterparts. So kudos to the Americas. There's a role and an opportunity for us to play a greater leadership role on the international stage. We certainly have the track record, I think, to support that. And I'm going to steal a term from one of my friends and colleagues, Emily Rees, who's the CEO and president of CropLife International. And that is Canada and the Americas are well positioned to deliver science-driven diplomacy. I like that. I think there's a place for us in that conversation. And I think domestically, with respect to a regulatory framework, let the innovators continue to innovate. It's what they do best. And it's at the core fundamental reasons why I think the system continues to be a modern miracle. Thanks very much for your attention and the opportunity to contribute to today's discussion.
Thank you, Erin. On the contrary, fantastic remarks, all of you. And the Americas are really a breadbasket for the world. You look at many of the statistics, it's about a third of global agri-food exports, half of the world's biodiversity, a third of world freshwater. Like the Americas are feeding the world now, and there's only going to be even more pressure on the next 20 years, and we get to peak population 2065, around 10 billion, 10.5. So there's going to be pressure on the Americas. We can't really extensify, so that's the sustainable intensification remark that Erin is making. So that's another panel we could do for a couple hours. My thanks for your patience, Ted. It's over to you. He's our last panelist. We'll go back to the States now, and then we'll open the questions online, get them ready in Zoom. I have colleagues in Spanish as well. We can do the translation on our end. And over to you, Ted McKinney.
Well, thanks very much. I presume I'm coming through acceptably. Just wave your hand if that's okay. Very good. Well, gosh, I can't start without saying a huge thank you to friends with IECA, all of you. I have known IECA for many, many years and consider myself one of its biggest fans. I think partly it's because the breadth and depth of what you do, the geographic scope. You're probably one of the key factors for keeping the Americas together, at least on a science-based, evidence-based line of thinking. And so to all of you, I am so grateful. The next thing I should say is, with a smile, I think I'm in violent agreement with all of the previous speakers, each who have shared some things, some references to studies, to concepts that I agree with very much. And so I might just do a quick endorsement of some of those in my comments, but kudos to all who have spoken before me. Very quickly, to our Canadian friends, you are probably not familiar with NASDA, but NASDA is the industry association here in the US, now 108 years old, that is where all of the state, that's the US state secretaries, commissioners, and directors of agriculture come together to work on policy together. It would be like your ministers of the provinces having an industry group. And by the way, I have talked to many of them thinking that a NASDA-like group up there could be very, very useful to all of them and in a broader sense to all of you in Canada. The reason is that we look through a farmer and rancher's lens first, second, and third, and then we get to the regulations, because in the States, many of the rules and regulations from the US EPA, the Food and Drug Administration, and USDA are handed off to the states, and those state departments of agriculture then implement them. And I know this because I served as the director of the Indiana State Department of Ag. And I might say we have a splendid relationship with our friends in Canada. Our family farm in Indiana, my twin brother manages the many, many farms down there. And even today, we have a swine operation with pigs that come from Manitoba. So I'm all in for the Canada-US, and I'll even throw in Mexico, Central and South America relationship. So back to the point. I am thrilled that you have chosen the words broken food system, and I'm glad that you offer that up as a narrative. I might be a little more pointed. I would call it a myth, And I would say that the words broken food system, at least in the Americas and most of the world, I won't pass judgment on every country, is simply rubbish. And it's the rubbish that you don't want to turn into fertilizer. I wouldn't call it food waste, and I wouldn't even call it animal waste. I think it's worse than that because it is absolutely unequivocally untrue. And I think it's people who don't understand or care to understand the virtues of the food system that much of the world has, and I count Canada and the US in that category. They don't care to understand what it is and what it brings. And so back to what so many of you said about it's a marvel of the last century, quite frankly, what we have developed. And for sure, it needs improvement. I'll not disagree with that. If that's what people mean by a broken or maybe partly broken system, okay, we can have a conversation. But just to categorize it as broken, and I've heard the words blow it up, that's rubbish that you don't even want to mess with. The evidence to the counter is substantial, and it suggests that by the productivity of our countries and our region, the food safety and the food quality, which is at an all-time high. And even in the midst of that, I just take great joy that all our farmers, including on our farm, are taking measures to improve on it. I think of the products and the practices that are reducing methane from animals. I take the point of our good friend from the Canadian Federation of Agriculture, Keith, when you suggested correctly the benefits that pasture brings to carbon sink and other concepts like that. So you bet we're all in on continuous improvement of an already quality system. And that should be our narrative. That's what I talk about. Continuous improvement of an already high quality system are the words I would suggest we use next time we gather. And clearly the Americas are making great progress. I heard the previous speaker speak to an idea that she is advancing with the Grains Council, and I have one that I'm advancing. I have a PowerPoint presentation. I've given it to some places. I haven't done that in Ottawa yet, but it's called The Power of And you can capitalize the word and, put it in neon lights, 53-point type style, whatever you want. But the point of it is that we are correctly, the world is correctly looking at all the things that are wrong with climate change and the need to improve on that. That's a good thing. But boy, oh boy, I hear too many people that say we must do that at any cost. And I categorically disagree with that. Look at what modern agriculture and innovation, 2 or 3 people have mentioned innovation, have done to continually improve productivity, but also improve on our treatment of the climate. I think of biodigesters. I think of cover crops. I think of products like Elanco Animal Health has, Bouvier, which is going to reduce methane by about 50%. And I think many countries on the world are using that product. And the list goes on. I will not list them all, but all of these, I think, are contributing to what someone else said, which is that we are the solution, or at least a big part of the solution, and certainly for all of agriculture. So in addition to the power of and my idea for that came straight from the GAP report. If you haven't seen it, if you don't know it, and if you're not familiar with it, you need to go to the Virginia Tech University website. Just look up GAP report, and they have a stellar report that gets at the measurement year to year of the total factor productivity measurement. It's marvelous because it takes data that every country provides to my alma mater at Purdue University. It's called, I'll think of it just a moment. I just lost it. But at any rate, it takes data provided by countries around the world on their agricultural data, emissions data, productivity data, and then calculates the total factor productivity, which really is a measurement of efficiency. And we must continue to be efficient. Efficiency means less output per input, and that includes greenhouse gases. It includes methane. It includes all the things that we want to reduce, but it also measures the increase in productivity. So Virginia Tech University gap report, total factor productivity, I suggest you add that to your nomenclature. And what it's all about is innovation, which has delivered us for many years. Now, to those that are impatient, I hearken back. I'm a bit of a historian, including agriculture, and I hearken back to when hybrid seed corn came along. Folks, we think it was an overnight sensation. No, it was not. It took 20 years for farmers to really adapt and see just how obvious it is. I can look at biotechnologies. I was a big part of that when I was in the corporate sector. It's taking and has taken many years, and still many parts of the world do not accept the incredible benefits of biotechnology. I chuckle. Our farm produces GMO crops, we produce non-GM, and we produce some other crops like Plenish, soybeans. Guess which ones take more pesticides? It's the non-GMO. And guess where it's going? Straight to Europe. I love it. The dichotomy here is just fabulous. So we have got to keep focusing on innovation, and oh my gosh, are they coming? There's now hundreds of biologicals coming out that might be a kindler, gentler approach if you believe that that's important. For goodness sake, we have gene editing. That was mentioned by a couple of speakers. And the solutions are in the offing. They are on the cusp. We've got to keep promoting that. As far as I'm concerned, IECA deserves a medal or medals of honor for its own efforts because you have spoken truth to power. It's not easy to take on the United Nations. It's not easy to take on the EU and other like countries that are leading this populist move that says blow up the systems. I think most of you are familiar with Farm to Fork, a part of the EU Green Deal. I'm fully engaged with them, I hope in a productive manner, because I want them to see the joys that our own family farm and our countries and our region, the Americas, have proven. So IECA, someday I'll present you with that medal. And I'm not going to forget our farmers. I recognize the two previous speakers represent a lot of farmers in Canada. I myself am a card-carrying member of the American Farm Bureau and the Indiana Soy and Corn Associations because that's what our farm participates in. We'll give the farmers medals of honor as well. And I'll close by saying NASDA, my association, all our members, and I personally continue to stay engaged. We're not walking from this debate. We're doubling down. That's why we're spending much, much more time internationally. 5 outbound international trips last year and 2 inbound. Next year, it'll be more. And it's all about exchanging and showing the great joys of the innovation that we've all seen. And then finally, I'll close by saying, I hope we can sustain and even grow our work with IECA and Canada and the US federal governments. We, the states, can't do it alone. We have a powerful voice and we're lifting that voice, but it cannot be done without the great work with our friends in the governments of Canada, the US, the Central and South American governments, and of course, IECA, you guys are the champions that really are the glue that keeps a lot of that together. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to share these few comments and count me in for next steps. Thanks again.
Excellent, Ted. Sincere thanks for those kind comments about IECA, and I hope that the presidential debate tonight will be as entertaining as your talk. We are behind schedule. Normally it would be the break, so I'm going to suggest we entertain questions until 10:30 and then start at 10:40 the next panel. So we have a mic, I understand, that can go around the room. Vivian or Valentina, if you can share the mic, just raise your hand online, raise it in Zoom so we can see you, or post your question to the chat. We've posted the gap report. Ted's mentioning the gap report. I look forward every fall. It's an excellent piece and it's a good read. So we've just posted it to the chat online as well. Just raise your hand so we can see who would like to ask. Anyone from the panel, the author of the report. Maybe we can post online on the screen the author in addition to Margaret. There's a question online. Go ahead, Gloria. Ah, pardon, vas-y. Over here onto my left.
For this seminar. One question that I haven't seen here that was discussed is mostly about education. Education for the consumers, how to educate much more the consumer on healthy food. I see that there's an increase of 30% of calories and 34% of proteins, but we still have obesity on the other spectrum. So how much can we also educate consumers on better consume agricultural food?
My thanks to the ambassador from El Salvador for that question. And anybody on the panel wish to respond? Aaron, please.
One suggestion I would make in this space, thank you for the question, would be with respect to the role for government. And that was one thing I didn't mention, is I think we did an excellent job, certainly from a Canadian government's perspective during the pandemic, communicating the science behind the COVID vaccine, communicating and educating the general population. And I think that's something that our regulators and policymakers could do a better job of, I think, when it comes to some of the agriculture innovations that Canadians may know a little less about and have a level of skepticism about. And so we've got a number of agencies and regulators who do good work in this space. And so I think more frequently taking opportunities to communicate the science behind some of the decisions that they're taking would go a long way, I think, to easing some of the concerns of the Canadian public, certainly. That would be one perspective on that question. Thank you.
Keith, please go ahead.
And I would echo Aaron's comments because the government has an audience of everyone, so certainly they can provide that support. I believe that if we can find a way to better support our agriculture in the classroom programs, so that we start not necessarily with young children who may not understand that, but certainly through our education system, the benefits of good nutrition, good diets, and in conjunction with that, work with our dietitians and nutritionists that are out there, somehow figure out a way to collaborate a better relationship with them, because they certainly can echo what a balanced, nutritious diet is. So there are avenues out there for us to explore. I know for me, from a primary food producer perspective, part of our issue is we just don't have the feet on the ground to do that education piece, but we need to work in collaboration with the entire industry and with the government to get that voice out there.
I know we're short of time. I might jump in really quickly just to say, I mean, I agree that, whether it's in terms of agricultural innovation, nutrition, food loss and waste, that public education is a big part of the solution. I would only, and Lord knows, we try to communicate positive messages. In fact, we held an open house at the Central Experimental Farm just down the road on this weekend. We've had public education programs of various kinds. Communicating to a mass audience is a journey. It's not a destination. No matter how much money you spend and how often you repeat a message, it doesn't get heard by everybody the same way. And it's just one of the realities of communicating to a mass audience. But I take the point that government has a role in that area, and Lord knows we do try.
Just to invite my colleagues in the U.S., if there's any additional feedback, reactions to what you've heard, Margaret, and your team in D.C., feel free to raise your hand.
Sure.
Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. I think, a big part of all of this is communications. And I really appreciated both the strong messaging from Elise and from all of the participants, from Ted and Eric. And, it's very easy for us to talk amongst ourselves. We are all involved in agriculture in various ways, but I just would continue to encourage all of us to get outside our circles as much as we can. I know we have busy lives and busy work, but the more we can take time, perhaps just even once a month, to get outside our own silo and hear what people are saying and engage in perhaps a little bit of just curious conversation to learn more about what is it that people are concerned about with our food systems, to understand them a little bit more. I like the tone that we tried to take in the ICA report, that, we're providing evidence, but we're also encouraging people to think about how can we help the system And what are the best ways we can use narrative to include farmers in the solutions to the problems that may or may not exist? I think the tone of the report is good because it points out that blaming a food system or blaming farmers for problems that aren't their fault is not a way to get them to improve their practices. And so, I think that's just something to keep in mind, is that we can all be humble a little bit, listen to what the problems are, but then provide stories of success. And as all of you have said, we point to continuous improvement. There are no silver bullets where things are going to get fixed overnight. The agriculture system is complicated and complex, but that idea of continuous improvement is a great story that we have to tell. So share the report with your friends and colleagues outside of our circles. Share the stories in the GAP report. We're going to have an event next week in partnership with Virginia Tech, in which we share stories from the Americas of sustainable productivity. And those are all good news stories. So the more we can focus on the good news, I think the better chance we have of making change.
Thanks, Margaret. And we're almost out of time. I'd just like to invite Eugenio then to provide a final remark and all that you've heard over the last hour to your report.
Thank you very much, Charles. Just a couple of comments on the obesity point. In the Americas now, certainly in the US and Canada, the obesity problem is far greater than hunger or any other of the malnutrition problems. In Latin America, about double the number of people that suffer from obesity compared to people suffering from hunger. So this is a real problem. And it has a lot of implications, costs, because of the non-communicable diseases and so on and so forth. So if you look at the cost, at the analysis of the true cost of the hidden cost, a lot of that come from the health implications of obesity. However, that's not a problem of the farmer. It's a problem of the transition and the food processing, that we moved from focus on calories in the 60s to convenience in diet convenience in the 90s. And now we are transitioning to a healthy diet and diversity. So we need to complete that transition. And to that, in Latin America, there are several countries that are using a stronger labeling for food in terms of calories, excess sugar, excess fats, and so on and so forth, which has implications. I'm a former negotiator at the WTO for my country. That has implications for the TBT, the Technical Barriers to Trade agreement, because you have to be so. That's a huge issue that would need to be considered. And I finished, Charles, with this other separate comment. What we need to consider in the Americas is how different are the agrarian structures. Basically, at the world level, more than 80% of the farmers are less than 2 hectares. In the Americas, we have larger sizes. So the way that we need to organize the trade, we need to consider these big differences. Uruguay, Canada, the US, they have around 100 plus hectares, the size of the unit. In Argentina, it's even higher. Australia is even higher. Brazil, it depends on how you count, but the average is 70 something, the last census, but that because there are a lot of small farmers, and so the average is that. But once you take the very small, it's very, very large. While in India, China, etc., you have a different structure. So how we manage a trade system and also the food security of those countries that really have 900 million, like in India or in China, etc., of people working on less than 2 hectares.
Thanks, Eugenio. And you're reminding me of a climate report I was just reading, comparing different countries in the US and the Americas. Brazil is the largest ag emitter, over 500 million tons. US is over 300 million. Canada is 68-ish. So we're quite small as a country in terms of contribution. Ag is about 10% of overall GHGs. And you take the global picture, it's 55 to 60 billion. Canada's economy is 750 million. and ag is not even a tenth of that. So I'm trying to give you perspective to see that ag is quite efficient. It goes back to certain points that other groups have made on the panel. That's another panel I'm going to add another day. But sincere thanks for your attention. My thanks to all the panelists from the US, from Canada. Enriching discussions. I wish we had more time. I see that there's some discussions going on the Zoom. I'm happy to see that it's all about science and peer review and industry and evidence-based decision-making. I'm going to propose only a 5-minute break so we can start hard at 10:40 with our next panel. That will be moderated by CropLife Canada, our sponsor. And I know some of you told me that you would leave after this first panel, so I'm really, really thankful for your time. I know the drive into this morning for some of you was a bit hellish or long, and so appreciate the sacrifice, and it's good to see a lot of friends and partners here. Hope you've enjoyed learning and listening, and I hope some of that key messaging you'll be able to take home and take back to work and with your colleagues. My thanks to, again, to all the panelists. Grand merci. Mil gracias a todos. Take care, Eugenio. Great tie, by the way. I'm teasing because he asked me this morning, do I wear a tie? I said, yeah. Thanks, Margaret. Take good care.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. Welcome back from the break. My name is Pierre Patel. I'm the President and CEO of CropLife Canada. CropLife Canada is part of a global network of CropLife affiliates where we represent the companies that provide the seed technology and crop protection products for the agriculture sector. Very happy to be here today. Very happy to partner with IECA and sponsoring this event, these great topics. IECA's philosophy is very much aligned with ours as CropLife as innovators, and very, very happy to have the partnership that we have. Also pleased to see so many of our agricultural partners in the room, commodity organizations, farm groups, embassies, our government partners. Great to see everyone here and online as well. One of the disadvantages of being a little later on the agenda is all the great lines have been taken already about this topic. I had a few that were already spoken, but in terms of the food system, certainly I would agree that it isn't broken. In fact, it is a good news story that should be celebrated. If we look at the production increases in the last 50 years, and just in Canada alone, but we've seen probably similar numbers around through the Americas, is that in certain grain crops, from barley to wheat and canola, we've seen increases of production between 170 and 350% in the past 50 years. That's phenomenal. In the same amount of land, we're producing 3 and 4 times more food than we were 50, 60 years ago. The other success story there is that on that same land, we're using 95% less pesticide active ingredient per acre than we were in the 60s. So producing 3 times more crop using 95% less active ingredient of pesticide per acre. It's a success story that should be celebrated. And we'd like to see those innovations continue and have more success stories in 50 years to look back at today. But one of the things we need is a regulatory environment that enables those innovations. So our members invest millions of dollars a day in new innovations, whether it's seed technology or crop protection. But the first step, really, once they've found successful products, is to get through the regulatory hurdles. And someone said it earlier, we need a regulatory system, and we support that. It makes the system better. It makes the products that come out of it better. But it has to be enabling, and it has to be timely, and it has to be predictable. And I think that is one of the struggles we have globally. Even here in Canada, at times, we have run into some challenges where it's become either less timely or less predictable, and that does impact innovation. It does impact investment. And so if the one message that you'll hear consistently from me is that a predictable, timely regulatory system that enables innovation is really the key to the growth that we really need to see as a sector. We've heard a little bit about gene editing. We're very excited about that. Canada has just finalized this year its guidance for gene editing and new breeding techniques. We think it's world leading. It took a little longer to get off the shelf than we had hoped, but it's here now. And we think that it will bring tremendous opportunities for Canadian growers and growers around the world. And we'd like to see that a similar policy be adopted in other countries where they're still grappling with what to do with gene editing and some of these other new technologies. In terms of trade, we've heard already today that the Americas represent the highest concentration of food exporting nations in the world. We're feeding not just the Americas, we're feeding the world out of the Americas. And Canada, as many countries in the Americas, we rely heavily on exports, but we also import a lot of food. Last time I checked, we don't grow oranges and avocados here, never will likely, but we grow a lot of grain, way more than we can ever use, and that grain needs to be shipped, and there's parts of the world that also can't grow that food. And so the reliable trade, and it's what the genesis of this panel is really to talk about that predictable regulatory environment I spoke of also applies to trade rules. And so maximum residue limits, and I'm sure our esteemed panelists here will explain exactly what those are in more detail, but those also need to be science-based, they need to be predictable, and they need to be fairly applied so that when a grower here in Canada applies a product that's been approved as safe and goes to export that crop, that they don't run into problems with a non-tariff barrier that says, we don't want that chemistry on there, or we want a lower level. And so that really disincentivizes innovation and growth. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I would like to introduce Emily Bergeron, my colleague at CropLife Canada. She's the Vice President of Chemistry on the crop protection side, and she will moderate this panel, and I'll ask her to introduce the panelists.
Thank you, Pierre. Good morning, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here today to talk about maximum residue levels, or as we will call them going forward, MRLs to be short. So today's panel, as Pierre alluded to, will dive into the significance of MRL for maintaining the delicate balance between trade, productivity, and innovation. We'll explore how different stakeholders, including farmers, regulators, and policymakers, can collaborate to ensure that MRLs serve their purpose at facilitating trade without becoming barriers to trade. So I look forward to the insight and expertise of our two panelists today that I will introduce. So our first panelist is Mac Ross, Vice President, Trade Policy and Crop Protection at Canada Grains Council. And he's joined here today by Greg Bartley, Director, Crop Protection and Crop Quality at Pulse Canada. So welcome to you both, and thank you very much for joining us here today. So before we start digging really much into MRLs and the issues related to that, I would like to ask you both to explain how and why MRLs are relevant for the sector and grower groups you represent here in Canada. And I'm sure that what you're going to say today is going to apply to pretty much everyone in the Americas that relate to agriculture. So I think we have some slides to put up to assist with that first question. And Mac, do you want to start?
Sure. Well, the slides are being pulled up. Thanks for that introduction, Emily. So as Emily mentioned, my name's Mac Ross. I'm with the Canada Grains Council working on the trade policy and crop protection file. And I know our president, Aaron, provided a bit of an overview of the Canada Grains Council, so I won't delve too deeply into that. But essentially, we do represent the entire value chain within the Canadian grain sector. And our aim is really to provide and facilitate a unified vision on key issues facing the Canadian grain sector. And one of those key areas is around crop protection policy. And our work in that policy space is to advocate for domestic science-based policies that enable growers here in Canada to utilize crop protection products and new innovation, and then also advocate to ensure the use of those crop protections does not limit market access. So Pierre sort of alluded to that. So I had a couple slides here. I'm not sure if there's some technical difficulties with that, that's fine. I can go through them fairly quick as well, because I know some of these themes have been touched on as well. So you can move to the next slide. Perfect, thank you. So, and this has been touched on already, but I just wanted to provide a bit of additional context as to why we're talking about this today, why MRLs are relevant for our sector here in Canada. So to start off, as you know, Canada is a major producer of grain, producing nearly 100 million metric tons of cereals, canola, pulses, soybean, corn, and flax annually. And if you move to the next slide, as Pierre touched on, because we enjoy favorable conditions for grain production that far exceed the needs of our population, we're very much an export-oriented sector. And we export the majority of grain that's grown in Canada. And throughout the value chain, the success of our sector is really dependent on our ability to export our production to the global marketplace, and that requires free and open trade and rules-based trade. So over the past several decades, Canada's seen significant growth in grain exports, and this past year, they were valued at around $30 billion Canadian, and were supplied to over 140 different countries. So this slide here illustrates the top export markets for Canada by value in 2023, as well as some of the past year values for those markets as well. So as you move to the next slide, I also just wanted to provide some context when it comes to the global role of the Canadian grain sector, but not just the Canadian grain sector, of the American agricultural sector as well, when it comes to food security. So despite some of the ongoing productivity gains, especially that we've seen here in Canadian agriculture and grain production, the rapid escalation of unmet global demand is really quickly absorbing these increases. And this dynamic, of course, is further strained by geopolitical conflicts in key grain-producing regions like Russia and Ukraine, expanding conflict in the Middle East, along with the ongoing climate-related challenges like drought and so forth. And all of this is really causing global food security to become increasingly precarious. And as you can see on the left, so these are charts and some analysis done by our friends at the Farm Credit Corporation. I think we have some friends from FCC in the room here. So that left chart is the FAO's food price index. And you can see it was stable prior to the pandemic from 2015 to 2020, spiking to record levels in 2022 before moderating a little bit this past year, but still at higher levels than what was observed historically. So this is, combined with an increasing number of food insecure people, this higher food prices. And as we know, grain production is a global endeavor, with different regions contributing to this international supply that functions sort of as a safety net when there's a shortfall in specific regions. But nonetheless, the burden of meeting the world's grain demand, as we've heard a number of times today, really falls to just a handful of countries. Canada is a part of that, and as we have heard, the Americas are a big part of that as well. And despite a projected increase in annual production this year in total grains, the global stock-to-use ratio, as you'll see on the screen there, is expected to decline to its lowest in a decade. We've seen big droughts in some of the key exporting regions around the world. That's a big part of the rationale for that. So in closing on this, in order to fulfill the global role that I've touched on for the Canadian grain sector and the Americas agricultural sector as well, we really need rules-based trade and an environment that allows for the free flow of grain production from areas of surplus to those of deficit. So if you move to the last slide there, when we talk about rules-based trade, we have made some significant gains in this area over the past couple decades, and we've seen broadly the liberalization of trade along with a fairly steady reduction of tariffs. But conversely, and on a parallel track, we're seeing a rise in non-tariff trade measures negatively impacting our ability to trade agricultural goods across borders. And this rise of non-tariff trade barriers, or NTBs, disproportionately impacts the agricultural sector globally. As you see from the chart on the left, from the global database on non-tariff measures, most of agricultural trade is subject to sanitary and phytosanitary measures, or SPS, as well as technical barriers to trade. And those two areas are where we see a lot of these NTBs arising. And while the nature of these NTBs can vary, we've seen an increasing amount of NTBs relating to MRLs and pesticide residues. And this is primarily due to more missing MRLs, less use of international standards, a number of reasons that I hope we'll get into today. But we do see some solutions in this space, and I think we'll touch on that today as well, in terms of greater regulatory harmonization, greater adoption and improvement of international standards like Codex, et cetera. So with that, I'll maybe pause there and pass it off to my colleague Greg.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Mac, and good morning, everyone. My name's Greg Bartley. I'm the Director of Crop Protection and Crop Quality here at Pulse Canada. I should have some slides as well. Were they on that presentation too, Mac? Nope, no slides? No slides. Okay. I'll just go verbally then. So at Pulse Canada, we're the national association that represents both the pulse growers, but also the exporters and processors of pulse crops in Canada. So essentially, the growing and exporting. A lot of the work we do is kind of put into two different buckets. One is diversifying the markets and market demand. So making sure that we have new markets to go into, not reliant on a single market, but also addressing market access barriers too. So this could be, making sure our crops get to market, transportation issues, but also the barriers that Mac touched on too, which is associated with crop protection products or MRLs, which is what I'm focused on here at Pulse Canada. Trying to go through my mind in terms of what the slides were now.
Be on there, right?
Yeah,
at the end
I think
of that
they are
package.
at the end of Mac's
They're on the same presentation.
Oh, it's the same deck, you just go...
Okay, it'll be a lot more interesting if you have some slides. But in terms of that, so yeah, a large focus on MRLs, and I think it's just a reinforcement from a grower's perspective of how big of an issue this is and the impediments that we face and the solutions that are needed to address this issue, as it seems to be an increasing problem. I wouldn't say the problem's getting any easier, which, from a job security perspective, sure, I might have a bit more work, but ideally I'd like to put myself out of work on an issue like this. So when we look at pulse crops, Canada is the larger exporter of pulse crops. We export about 85% of our production to over 130 different markets. And I think that's why it's important from a pulse industry perspective of why good MRL policy in our exporting nations is needed. When you deal with 130 different markets, there's a situation where all those MRL policies can be different. So we have them up now. So we'll go to next slide. We'll probably jump through a few of these here pretty quick. We'll keep going. One more. Another one. Okay, so if we look at the pulse production here in Canada, Matt kind of touched on this in terms of agriculture as a whole, but for pulse production over the past 20 years, we've seen significant growth, under 100 million metric tons back in 1990s to over 8 million metric tons. And you can see the large growth of this is from peas and lentils from a pulse perspective. That being said, though, from a minor use crop perspective, we still deal with dry beans, chickpeas, faba beans, and starting to dabble into lupins now into Western Canada as well. So still a minor perspective for some of these crop types, but within the pulse category, lots of considerations. Next slide. As I mentioned, we export over 85% of what we produce here in Canada. So as an exporting nation, we produce far more than we could possibly consume here domestically. And just this is the breakdown of markets over the past in 2023. So, a large portion of that going to Indo-Pacific, where that's India and China and other markets, but just a variety of markets, again, over 130 different markets. So lots to consider. Next slide. Just want to touch on real quick, there's many different ways, I mentioned we do a little work on transportation at Pulse Canada. There's many different ways that our pulse crops can get to markets, and it's important to consider that when we deal with MRL issues too, as how your product moves through the supply chain, whether it gets bulked and blended and loaded into a bulk vessel at port, versus getting source loaded from a container at farm and put on container ship into the market, can impact your risk level in terms of MRL and residues in that final product too. And then if you look at the other side of things, value-added processing, in many cases, that is coming from, a single farm or from a few different farms, where, again, that risk level can differentiate itself between the level of blending that can occur on farm or within the supply chain. Next slide. And just to mention there, the majority of our pulse crops are exported through containers, so small lot shipments. In terms of the question, why are MRLs important to growers? I think it's important to understand to recognize the importance of crop protection to farmers and growers. The crop protection products are used in an integrated pest management system on farm, and really it's just to manage, maintain your yield potential and your end-use quality, many different benefits. Just want to highlight that there is significant planning that goes into farmers deciding to use a product. In many cases, this can happen during the growing season, but sometimes this planning happens well before the growing season, or a decision in the current growing season will impact next growing season. And so there's lots of different things to think about, especially with resistance management, trying to do good stewardship, rotate your chemical groups, things like that. So the reason I say that is really the need for long-term predictability is needed for planning purposes and making sure that all tools are available to farmers and left in the toolbox. Next slide. Real quick, I'm sure most folks know this, but just to reiterate from a grower's perspective why it's important, an MRL just represents the maximum amount of pesticide residues that are expected to remain on the food product when the pesticide is used according to label directions. So from a grower's perspective, MRLs really shouldn't be on their mind. If you have a registered product using according to label directions, you abide by the MRLs in that domestic country, not an issue. The challenge with that we face in the pulse industry and when we export 85% of our pulse production is you have to meet the MRLs in the export market in order to remain compliant. And that's where MRLs do become top of mind for farmers, as if there is a missing or misaligned MRL, that can have the potential to limit the use of that product on farm. So again, it's not a measure of food safety. MRLs aren't meant to do that. It's really meant to ensure that it's the products used according to label directions and facilitate trade. Next slide. The issue that we have, again, I've mentioned this a bit, is when we look at over that 130 different markets, the MRL policies in those export markets can be inconsistent. I think if you, pull I do have say a handful of markets there. Each one of these markets has differing MRL policies. Some countries like Canada, we have our own national MRL list. We don't have a deferral pathway, but we have a default MRL. Like you compare that to something like Angola at the other extreme end. There is no national MRL list. They don't have the regulatory capacity to implement that, but they defer fully to Codex, the international standard, and that's exactly what that was meant to do. So these different MRL policies create inconsistencies. When countries do create their own national lists, you have the potential to either not have an MRL to begin with, or those MRLs can be misaligned, where it could be higher in one country, lower in a different country, and that can create trade problems. Next slide. And at the end of the day, this whole issue around missing and misaligned MRLs hurts growers. Growers are the ones that really do bear the brunt of this. And something we do here in Canada is, in order to communicate or help manage to mitigate the risk of an MRL non-compliance, Pulse Canada and other commodity associations here in Canada participate in what we call the Keep It Clean program. And this is where we try to communicate, anytime there may be a major MRL risk with the use of a registered product here in Canada, if it has the potential to create a non-compliance, and we communicate that to farmers and industry to make sure that either we're not using that product. So for in this example, there's lentil growers have a registered product in Western Canada. It's available to use, but there's no MRLs in any of our export markets. So unfortunately, the message is pretty loud and clear. Do not use that product, as it will cause a concern. So this is something we try to do, and at the end of the day, this is just taking good, valuable tools out of the hands of farmers that they really need to address the pest challenges on their farms. So with that, I'll pass it back to Emily.
Thank you very much. So we'll unpack that a little bit, all the issues that Mac and Greg touched on. And I would like to start to talk about Codex. You've both mentioned Codex and the instrumental role that it plays in MRL setting standard. Codex is very relevant into this discussion because it's referenced into the WTO Sanitary and Phytosanitary Agreement as one of the 3 international standard setting bodies that members are to encourage to align their national or domestic standards or MRL with. So what is Codex role as it relates to MRL? Maybe I'll ask Mac to walk us through a little bit. What is Codex doing in that area?
Sure. So to back up a bit, the Codex Alimentarius Commission is a body established by the FAO and the WHO to develop food standards. And Codex includes around 190 members and member states in the EU as well. And the standards adopted by Codex are really aimed at not only protecting consumer health and safety, but also protecting fair practices in the trade of food. And one of Codex's standards is related to pesticide residues on feed and food, and those are the Codex maximum limits or Codex MRLs. And so Codex, really, through the Codex Committee on Pesticide Residues, is the foremost international setting body responsible for the establishment of MRLs. And on paper, Codex plays a very important role. Greg touched on this a little bit in harmonizing MRLs globally to protect consumer safety while also reducing non-tariff barriers. And it can be really important, as Greg mentioned on that slide with, I think it was Angola, but the MRLs that are established by Codex, if a country doesn't have an MRL in place, they have the option to defer to the established Codex MRL or also use those to inform their own MRLs that they set. And why that's important is because if we have a pesticide that's very important and an important solution for Canadian growers, but we don't have MRLs in key export markets, then we may not be able to use that product here in Canada. So Codex helps kind of fill that gap. But as maybe we'll get into, it is sort of the perfect solution on paper. There have been some challenges with the Codex process over the years, getting it to effectively and efficiently play that important role. For example, it's not untypical for a chemistry to be registered here in Canada, have a Canadian MRL set, but not yet have a Codex MRL set. So you run into that same issue. So delays like that, capacity issues at Codex that we'll maybe get into can be some challenges with that standard setting body, although it is very, very integral and important to our sector.
Yeah, as you said, Mac, Codex's role is undeniable, but yes, it's been facing quite a few challenges, especially I would say that these challenges were put in evidence during the pandemic, which slowed down dramatically the approval of new Codex MRLs for about 3 years. Greg, what would you say that the biggest challenge are with Codex at this point in time?
Yeah, just to reinforce the importance of Codex real quick too, from Pulse Industry perspective, when a life science company brings a new technology to market, we look to, from a Pulse Industry, we look to make sure that there's MRLs established in our export markets before that product comes to market. Codex is one of those. So when we talk about the challenges, the challenges at Codex ultimately delay technology getting into the hands of farmers, because if there's a backlog or if we're waiting on a Codex MRL, we can't have that product come to market until that's addressed. So the challenges is a backlog. Codex has a lot of work. Let's be frank. There's a lot of MRLs. There's a lot of uses, a lot of potential use patterns that folks are seeking, and that backlog is causing a delay. I think we're up to 2-3 years maybe of where they should be, and really the reason for this is just a lack of resources, lack of funding, lack of assessors to do the work. So to get there, I think I know there are plans to make efficiency changes, but they might be slow to implement. There's lots of ideas of how you can do that, whether it's making the assessment process a lot easier or providing communication back to improve future submissions, or potentially looking at putting in a situation where you don't need to get a product registered in a market first. Can you apply for a Codex MRL simultaneously while you're seeking registration in a market to then look to do it simultaneously, reduce that need. So the backlog, lack of resources, and let's give appreciation for the risk assessors that do the work. This should not go unthanked. But at the end of the day, let's recognize that this is a lot of times volunteer work. They're taking time out of their day job to do this assessing. It could be holiday time, all the prep time that goes into ahead of those meetings. It could be weekends, evenings where they can't do that work, where they have to do their day job on the side as well. So lots of issues, hopefully some solutions, But at the end of the day, there's a serious backlog there that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, so what can we do to help Codex? What, as industry, can we do, and what governments can do? What would you say are the biggest thing we can do to help resolve that backlog issue and probably the process issue that we're facing with Codex?
Yeah, I can touch on that a little bit. From an industry standpoint, there is sort of a concerted international industry effort to try and improve the efficiency and effectiveness of Codex. The Canadian Grains Council is a part of the International Agri-Food Network's Codex coalition that advocates for improvements to the Codex process, and that advocacy is really centered around a number of the issues that Greg raised and that have been raised already. So Greg touched on the lack of availability of experts to undertake the important reviews of toxicological and residue data that help inform and set Codex MRLs. And as Greg mentioned, a lot of those internationally recognized experts are from regulatory authorities and academia who do this work, but they're doing it oftentimes, they are doing it on a voluntary basis and in a personal capacity, not as a country representative. So a lot of the advocacy that we've done centers around trying to increase the availability and capacity of those expert reviewers. So the Canadian and US government, for example, have made funding available to train additional experts for that process. We need more of that type of thing. The resource constraints were touched on by Greg as well. And again, a lot of the advocacy by the IAFN's Codex Coalition focuses on advocacy for more sustainable and adequate funding by FAO and WHO as well as Codex members. That's critical for Codex to fulfill its mandate. Another area that I'll touch on too, as far as improving Codex, one kind of overarching theme is being able to, through this group like the IAFN or those of you here who are representing governments from the Americas, I think it's really important for both industry and government to really try and elevate the trade perspective at Codex, and also the relevancy of Codex, the importance of Codex in enabling trade. We have a list of items that we're advocating for to improve the processes, the resourcing, but I do think that needs to be prefaced by really elevating and showcasing how important and integral Codex is and these international standards are to enabling trade in agricultural goods.
Yeah, and maybe just to add to that too, I think when you look at Codex, obviously they have a lot of work to do. They have a very strict mandate, but we do see the potential, or some countries looking to expand that mandate, looking into environmental issues. And I think this will have a negative impact on the role of Codex. Let's keep Codex focused on what it does well and what it's meant to do, and not get sidetracked into other projects that will further distract from the good work they do and result in more backlogs.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. And I think we'll pivot a little bit from Codex now to Europe. I wanted to touch base on Europe because it's really hard to talk about MRL and some of the challenges we're facing with respect to international trade without talking about Europe. A lot of the panelists this morning in the private session mentioned MRL policy coming from Europe. So maybe I'll ask Greg first, why should we pay attention to what's going on in Europe, and why are Canadian growers concerned about European MRL policies in general at this point in time?
Yeah, for sure. So lots of focus on Europe in the work that I do. Europe's really important because not only are they driving a lot of the MRL revocations or the default MRLs, but we do see Europe as a bit of a trendsetter too, that some countries look to as a model, which is concerning. We've seen that spread to other countries. If we look at Mexico right now, actually too, where there's different policies being implemented that move away from a science-based system, that's the influence that European policies can have. So what is the impact on domestic growers? Well, if a product is revoked or not renewed within Europe, typically the MRL falls to a default level shortly after, and many times this could be within 6 months. The impact to growers in Canada can be significant if we don't have enough forewarning to prepare for something like that. As I mentioned earlier in the slide, we need preparation. We need to prepare in order to allow us to properly use these tools. And if they are used, let's recognize that grain is often stored on farm, potentially for a year or more, depending on the market too. We have a really good grain storage system here in Canada. So If that MRL drops, we could be in a situation where the grain becomes non-compliant, and we may not be able to ship that grain to Europe or cause problems. So as the list gets shorter, in many cases, this can also limit the farmer's ability to use that product, as I mentioned many times too. So at the end of the day, if we can't meet that MRL within Europe, we have to unfortunately rely on our Keep It Clean program to start communicating these to our growers that our registered products that were safe to use here in Canada may not be able to be used due to the MRL policy in export markets like the EU, which is rather unfortunate. So yeah.
Maybe jump in on that as well. Like, I think that issue that Greg mentioned around when a product gets pulled in the EU and shortly thereafter the MRL will fall to a near zero default, that has, major implications on the ability of growers in Canada and throughout the Americas in exporting to the EU if you're using a foliar-based product. And we maybe haven't seen it in Canada as much where the ones that they've pulled and the MRLs that have reduced have blocked trade across the board, but there's definitely the potential for that to increase as they move through their schedule of looking at different pesticides domestically. And Lloyd Day touched on this at the top, but what's really driving a lot of that is the EU has a hazard versus risk-based approach to regulating pesticides in the EU. So really, they're removing domestic registrations based on the potential for a substance to cause harm rather than the likelihood to cause harm. So it kind of gets back to the focus and as the Americas industry government really being champions for risk-based policy, especially in this realm, because that's really what's driving a lot of this. And beyond the pesticide regulatory sphere in the EU, we've also seen their move in the farm to fork and biodiversity strategy spaces, where those policy strategies included real arbitrary pesticide reduction targets. I think 50% reduction in pesticides by 2030. And now we've seen a bit of a walk back on that more recently in the EU. Leading up to and following the elections. But as Greg mentioned, there's no doubt a focus in the EU to try and influence global food systems. And we've seen that through the use of things like mirror clauses, for example.
Yeah, exactly. We've heard a lot, European politician, member of parliament, and commissioner talking about a new theme that emerged, which is the mirror clause or the reciprocity clause. With a desire from them to kind of create a level playing field for their growers, as I think many panelists mentioned. With the farm to fork, growers in Europe have lost a lot of tools to help increase their production. So now their politicians over there are looking at other tools to kind of control what is coming in so that they can provide a level playing field for their growers. Can one of you explain to us a little bit what the mirror clause here is and why we should be concerned about its application here on this side of the Atlantic?
Yeah, I can touch on that a bit first. And really, this term of mirror clauses, and I imagine many in the room are familiar with this as well, but it's the idea that any imports of agri-food products into the EU must mirror all of the EU's production standards. And this can include environmental regulations, climate, animal welfare rules, but also rules related to pesticides. So in other words, the way that food is produced in the third country must mirror how it's exactly how it's produced in the EU and the EU's production methods. So this has been a key demand from the EU farming community, environmental and social justice sectors as well in the EU, due to the fear of being undercut by agri-food imports into the EU. And I think one of the big questions we have, obviously, you can see a lot of potential for issues as far as impacting the ability to trade with the EU if they were to move forward full force in this area. But I think one of the questions we have too is how this would fit within the EU's WTO commitments with international trade rules, especially the free trade principle of non-discrimination. Can you really just ban imports from another country just because it has a different production method than your country? I think there's a lot of questions circling around that, but it just kind of shows the impetus and momentum that the EU has right now to try and inform and inform what other countries who are supplying them are doing and how they're producing their food.
Exporting their own model to other countries and imposing their standards, the one-size-fits-all approach that the European is really promoted with their green diplomacy. So the merit clause, is it solely a political concept at this point, or do you have any example? Have they started to implement it, and have they started to implement it in agriculture, Greg?
Yeah, so absolutely. So in our opinion, that they have. I think the most recent example was the MRL, their decision to lower the limits of MRLs for thiamethoxamclothianidin to a default level of 0.01 parts per million, based on global biodiversity concerns. I believe it was pollinators. So the belief there is well, let's be real, is essentially using MRLs to ban the products for use in other countries, as they know if that is used foliarly, they won't be able to meet the MRL requirements and export into the EU. So in our opinion, yes, they have started to implement the policy, whether they like to call it or not. And it's super concerning. You know, number one, applying MRLs for environmental concerns is not what MRLs are intended for and should not be used for at all. They're strictly for dietary concern, so let's keep it that way. And also, it's a concerning aspect because it sets a precedent of potential for future uses of to do this as well. So, you know, while from a pulse perspective in Canada, I may not be impacted by a decision to lower thiamethoxamclothianidin to a default level, the precedent sets is what's next. You know, what do they plan to do after that if they continue to go down this path? And I think that's the concerning aspect, and tends to keep growers up at night, actually. More reasons to take tools out of producers' hands. So yeah, super concerning.
Yeah, and I think the EU, to add to that, was really clear on their intention to go ahead and add additional active ingredients to the chopping block to change MRLs for environmental reasons or any other reasons, really, that suits their need in order to protect their own production against imports. So I think it's a very concerning precedent that we should all be looking at. But so I know it's been raised in the WTO by many countries that are here today at many occasions in many committees, if it's the SPS committee or the TBT committee, even at the agriculture session as well. So I'm curious to see what can we do to prevent the EU to go forward with such the implementation of the merit clause, or to do something similar with banning other active ingredients or lowering the MRL for environmental consideration, which will be a clear departure from international standard. What could industry do to prevent such measures, to the EU to continue to adopt such kind of measures, or what the government can do as well?
Yeah, and well, I think there's a lot that can be done from a joint industry government standpoint. And again, just kind of back to, because I really don't want to, really need to kind of underscore the precedent that could be set here. And you talked about the EU starting to look at other active ingredients and applying the same criteria and removing MRLs for that reason. But the precedent also kind of extends to the EU's global influence as well. Greg earlier touched on recent decisions in Mexico, for example, regarding the use of technology. And so I think it is really important that industry and government look to push back on the EU on this front as well. I think the term science-driven diplomacy was raised earlier, and I think that really is important and a joint government industry effort. From an industry standpoint regarding this specific proposal that we've been touching on, there currently is an industry action globally, a legal action against the EU on this. The EU Court of Justice case was just launched by the Kenya Fresh Produce Consortium and the Mod Tea and Seed Company, arguing that the regulation is regulatory overreach and contravenes the EU's law, and a number of industry groups globally have supported that in various ways. And so that's one way that industry is approaching that and pushing back on the EU's move away from a science-based approach. And as you mentioned, Emily, many countries have been very vocal in WTO committees regarding this measure, which is always important. But I do think more can be done on the government side to try and harness a response. And you know, the Americas are a strong like-minded group that could look at doing this. And in exploring other options beyond kind of raising notifications within WTO committees. We know other levers exist. There's dispute processes, things like that. I think that the precedent that could be set here is that important and that potentially damaging to the ability to export to the EU in the future and to food security globally, that we should be exploring all those type of options. And I think as we've mentioned many times to our own officials, Canada can play a real leadership role in that space. But I think this is a good contravention of folks as well that could be having these type of discussions.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe we only have 2 more minutes, so I'll go to our last questions. And we've heard a lot about Europe and what they're doing, which is obviously putting at risk international trade and food security. What would you say if we were to think about what to do for a country who would like to have a system, an MRL system that is trade facilitative, that is achieving what it's supposed to be? What would you say, what do they need to do? What a government should put in place in terms of regulations to ensure that MRLs are the trade facilitating tool that it could be? Maybe we'll start with, I don't know, Greg?
Sure, yeah. So I think, when I review MRLs in different export markets, I think what would make it a lot easier is, or what I appreciate from countries is when they have a deferral pathway. So if a country doesn't have a deferral pathway, let's get one in place so that if there is a missing or misaligned MRL, can we defer to, let's say, Codex, to utilize that MRL in that case to facilitate trade? It's a viable option. Codex has done the work to ensure the safety of it. Let's use it. So I think that's the first thing, is just recognize that if you don't have a deferral pathway, let's look to get a deferral pathway in place within the policy. Everything else along that list of countries I showed earlier in terms of, default MRLs and things like that, getting alignment with these MRL policies just creates that science and predictable regulatory system that's needed to facilitate trade. I talked about the predictability needed for growers, but it's also needed for exporters too. When we export these crops, we need to know when we're going into a market, is this going to be allowable or not, or can I make that investment to ship that product, or is it going to get turned around? We need the predictability. So those are a couple things. I don't know if Mac, if you want to add a few points.
Yeah, I think you covered it. I think generally, we would advocate for MRL and import tolerance standard setting processes to be risk-based, right? There's been a lot of talk around this divergence from looking at dietary risk assessments for setting MRLs to environmental considerations. I think it's very important that we're advocating for the purposes of being able to continue to not have MRLs act as a non-tariff barrier, continue to have MRL setting processes based on risk and based off of internationally accepted risk assessment principles. And part of that, another thing countries can do is what we talked about earlier around trying to improve international standard setting processes like Codex, for example. As we touched on, there's a lot of areas that could be improved there, and that would help greatly.
Thank you very much. I think that was really instructive. So if I can summarize, I think what we need for MRLs to be trade facilitating, they need to be transparent, predictable, and science-based, and we need to find a way to leverage Codex and help that process to continue and deliver the MRLs timely that we need in the future to ensure that there's continued trade flow of agriculture commodities. So thank you to our panel. I think we still have Jean-Charles, 10 minutes for questions. We have questions for the room. There are some microphones here as well as a question online. Yeah, there's a question here.
Okay. Thank you very much. My name is Carlos Morales. I am the ambassador of Colombia here in Canada. And thank you very much, Charles, for this invitation and all your presentations. I just wondering, because when you mention about agriculture, in agricultural terms, of course, Canada is, a great exporter. But also countries like Latin American ones, like Colombia, for example, we are our main sectors of exports are agricultural also. But you mentioned about high standards of regulations for those exports abroad. And in the case, for example, of Colombia, we are struggling every time how to gain access to the foreign markets. You are accompanied by technology, high productivity. And my concern is how, countries like developing countries can have access, for those technologies, for those improvements in how to gain access to the worldwide market, and how the countries like Canada can contribute in order to have for those globally, for those countries that they also try to improve the industry to get better access to the main markets abroad. This is thank you very much.
Yeah, I can touch on that too. And just kind of hearkening back to the discussion we had around codex and international standards, I think, the ability to have new important, agronomically important innovation and technology registered and approved for use. And of course, there's growers in underdeveloped countries that are very adept at adapting new technology. But if that product is going to be exported and there's not a international MRL or a Codex MRL established for that limits the ability of those growers to adopt and use that technology. So I think, to kind of get back to the point around Codex, improving the efficiency and effectiveness of Codex and having MRLs established internationally for those products when they're available for use, especially when they're addressing a very pressing agronomic or pest-related concern, is super important to have that more effective Codex process setting or MRL setting process.
Yeah, maybe if I understand your question correctly, in terms of a country like yours, how do you develop the capacity from a regulatory perspective so that you build the trust? That's what I'm understanding. I mean, I certainly, and I can't speak for the Canadian government, but there are some capacity building avenues available. I know CFIA, et cetera, does some of that. And so, for example, the new gene editing guidance that was just finalized, there is part of that a role for government to share their approach with other countries that are still grappling with what to do with gene editing, as a specific example. And so requests into CFIA and Health Canada, I think, would be well received, and I think that type of capacity building would be made available. And I know that on the pesticide side, there has been initiatives, for example, in the NAFTA region, North American region, on bringing some of the South American and Central American countries into those discussions to talk about how Canada and the U.S. have achieved a lot of the harmonization, a lot of how they do the regulatory reviews, and there was a role there at that NAFTA working group to help countries in the Americas as well. So I think there's a couple of specific opportunities there for you.
Yeah, maybe to add to that, for sure, regulatory alignment as well, or regional regulatory alignment is a way also of improving access to technology and innovation, where countries are working together to do the approvals together, leveraging each other's resources. Regulatory resources are an issue here in Canada, as they are probably in Colombia as well. So relying on other countries' regulatory decision, learning how to leverage those, working with neighbors like we do with the NAFTA technical working group on pesticide, or I know some initiative from the Southern Corn as well. So I think there are ways of achieving that, and obviously, as Pierre mentioned, technical support or assistance from other countries.
Just to add, from an ICA standpoint, we're hosting a delegation from Belize and Honduras with CFIA next week to help with the kind of things that Colombia is interested in. So it's part of our role, because the Codex, there's not a lot of presence with FAO or WHO in the Americas, so they come to ICA. We play a leadership role in that space for the continent. And when you were trying to export here, the first thing a Canadian buyer is going to ask a Colombian exporter is, are you certified? And if you're not, there's no opportunity to export at all. They'll hang up the phone. But having said that, cut flowers, Colombians are the leading exporter to Canada. So we use them often as a model for the rest of the other groups that would like to export to this country. Online, just for the panel, in the chat, I don't know if you're following on Zoom, there was a question about science-based and peer-reviewed science-based. And the value of non-peer-reviewed is influencing too much some of the regulatory decision-making. Is that an issue or not for your in Canada or elsewhere?
I can take that one. I mean, this is an accusation, if you will, that's leveled quite frequently from NGOs that are not very favorable to crop protection in particular. The difference when you're creating a regulatory package for a brand new active ingredient, there is no peer review because the data is being generated as you go so you have regulatory requirements. They're very strict in terms of the protocols. They have to follow good laboratory practices. So the criteria, regulators around the world, including Canada, US, et cetera, make it so that the data that do come in from the companies is of extremely high quality. So it doesn't diminish the fact that it's not sort of peer reviewed in journals because it's confidential sort of data from a proprietary point of view. But the standards are very high and the regulators ensure that the data is of extremely high quality. So I think that issue is moot really in terms of the regulatory process.
We have another question online. Okay, I don't see any hands raised here. With the EU Parliament vetoing more MRL proposals that were evaluated by its own scientific body, EFSA, or voted for by its SCOPAF committees, what do you believe is the path forward where it seems there is no consistency within the EU on MRLs?
Yeah.
Who was the... Yeah, the path forward. I can acknowledge that this is a reality and it is going to be a growing trend. Parliament has new power to veto MRL after it's been gone through EFSA review and SCOPAF process. And we are going to see more of them in the future. This is what our sister organization, CLI, is proposing. In terms of what to do, if there is anything we can do as both, I would say, as industry and government, is really to continue to talk to the EU about the importance of science-based regulations and how this is through that you will improve public trust, because I think at the origin of all that, it's about public reaction. So continue to promote science-based regulations, I think will be extremely important, not just to the sectors over there, as well as to MEPs, engaging with them, having our government playing a role defending their own science as well, explaining their processes and how regulatory approaches work and how safe those products are when used according to label, obviously. But I think that this is part of a communication effort that will need to take place in order to communicate the importance of science-based decision-making and how it is important and critical for European growers to have access to these innovations and how they rely also on imports to feed their people.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's all part of the engagement strategy with the EU. And I think too, like the importance of MRLs, as we touched on today, in facilitating trade and the linkage of that with food security as well. So as far as the engagement with the EU, kind of outside of at times we'll engage with DG Agri or DG Sante, but also the DG Trade, right? And the trade counterparts that we have in the EU, they understand that, and they're the ones who have to respond to their trading partners' comments and concerns when they put in place a policy that impacts trade. So I think, having a comprehensive group of agencies in the EU that you're engaging with on this to kind of underscore the importance of MRLs in facilitating trade and food security is important as well, just to kind of add on to what you've noted there, Emily.
I think it was mentioned earlier about the importance of the Americas, and I think Americas is a tremendous voice for all the reasons we've talked about today. And so, another tool is that greater alignment among the Americas in terms of messaging and reaction to European policies, I think is something that can still be improved. So.
Yeah, ICA is doing that, agreed. And so we met last week with the Mexican government, and there's a presidential change October 1st. They've had their elections. The new president, being with a PhD in physics, we understand now that she's way more open to science than her predecessor, which seems to be good news. We also had a chance to speak to the new secretary, Berdegue. He's from FAO. He's very technical, very open to science as well. So it looks promising in terms of any policy changes there. It'll take a little while. I haven't seen the full platform, but it's a different approach. That's for our intelligence, anyway, from having spoken to them. Anybody in the room? I see our lead for plant health at Proce Norte. Did you want to say anything in reaction to what you've heard? Aman?
No, yeah.
Here.
Thank you so much, and great discussion so far. My name is Aman, and I'm with Agriculture Canada. So although Agriculture Canada is not directly linked to the establishing MRLs, but we have seen that too. I think as you have pointed, I think the greater harmonization between Americas would be the key. And I know like CFIA is involved as well, and then the PMRA, and how they're collaborating with other countries in America while we are evaluating the MRLs. I think that would be the key thing. But I think the ongoing discussion is important, and I'm glad that ICA is doing that without the presence of Codex in America. So that's great. So no further comments, but thank you so much for inviting.
Anybody else in the room? Any thank yous or wrap up comments?
But thank you very much. Thank you, AICA, for organizing this event today. Thank you for organizing this panel. I think it's a discussion to be continued, given the challenge that we have in front of us. As Greg said, we've started to discuss MRL, all of us, a long time ago, and I think it's going to be an issue for the next 10 years, maybe more. But let's hope that we can get to a better place than where we are today, with a more harmonized MRL system in the future. So thank you to our three panelists today, and thank you to you and your staff for organizing the event.
On the contrary, thanks to you. And I'm always excited when I hear people say IICA, because in Spanish we always say ICA. And then AICA sounds like iPhone or Apple-ish, it's kind of sexy. But appreciate, and our sponsors, thank you, on the contrary, for your support, and fantastic panel, very enriching discussions. My thanks to all of you who made your sacrifices going through traffic in Ottawa this morning. Thank you, everyone online, for taking part. This closes our session, our workshop. Just one public announcement. Our next event will be on trade and sustainability on the September 20th. And so it's a workshop. We have additional details. Reach out to any of the team members. We can give you details if you'd like to learn more. And it's been a pleasure, as always, to work with some of our friends and partners at ICA. And we look forward to continuing that relationship and strengthening those institutional partnerships going forward with you and advancing agriculture development in the Americas. Thanks so much. Well done.